Marcus Brown had just finished a long-awaited visit to his mother after returning from a 10-month deployment overseas. Dressed in his full Army uniform, decorated with medals of honor and service, he felt a sense of peace as he drove through a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of day that felt normal, again a break from the chaos of war and the weight of responsibility. As he turned a corner near a park, flashing red and blue lights lit up behind him. Confused but calm, Marcus pulled over immediately. 2 white police officers approached his car, hands already resting on their holsters. One of them tapped on the window aggressively and demanded to see his license and registration. Marcus complied without hesitation, handing over not only his license but his military ID as well, explaining that he was active-duty military, just returning home. Instead of acknowledging his service, the officers exchanged looks and said he fit the description of a suspect reported in the area. Marcus, trying to stay respectful, asked for clarification. That was all it took for things to shift. The officers ordered him out of the car. "Sir, I've done nothing wrong," he said, still calm but confused. But they didn't listen. They pulled the door open, dragged him out roughly, and forced him to the ground. "Stop resisting," one yelled, though Marcus hadn't moved at all. With his hands behind his back and his face to the pavement, he could feel the eyes of neighbors. Watching in shock, an elderly woman walking her dog yelled, "He's in uniform." But the officers ignored her. As the cuffs tightened around his wrists, Marcus realized something chilling: his uniform didn't protect him from being seen as a threat. Marcus sat on the curb, hands cuffed tightly behind his back, his uniform wrinkled and dirty from being shoved onto the pavement. The sun beat down on him, but it wasn't the heat that burned, it was the humiliation. Despite being calm, respectful, and fully identified as a U.S. Army officer, he was treated like a criminal. One officer paced in front of him, while the other ran a background check that would turn up nothing. Bystanders began to gather, some recording on their phones, others just staring in disbelief. A teenage boy asked, "Why are you arresting a soldier?" but received no answer. An older man shouted, "You got the wrong guy." Still, the officers acted like they were in control, their pride refusing to admit a mistake. Marcus, though furious inside, said nothing. He had seen worse in combat, but this was personal. His training told him to stay calm, not just for his safety, but for everyone watching. When he once again asked, "What am I being detained for?" one officer snapped, "Don't question me. We'll figure that out soon enough." The other leaned over and mocked, "Nice uniform. Doesn't mean you're above the law." Marcus replied quietly, "I've fought for your right to wear that badge." That silence that followed was heavy. It was clear these men weren't just enforcing the law, they were abusing their power. Marcus looked around at the people watching. Their faces were a mix of confusion, anger, and sadness. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. This moment, this wrongful arrest in broad daylight, was now bigger than 2 officers and 1 soldier. It was a reflection of something broken. And when one officer finally said, "You get 1 phone call," Marcus knew exactly who to call and that everything was about to change. With his hands still cuffed behind his back, Marcus struggled to pull his phone from his pocket as one officer hovered over him, watching closely. "1 call, make it count," the officer said with a smug grin. Marcus didn't respond. He scrolled through his contacts and tapped on a name labeled Captain J. Harris, his commanding officer. The call connected in seconds. "Sir, it's Sergeant Marcus Brown. I've been detained by local police. No charges, still in uniform. I need help," he said calmly but firmly. Captain Harris didn't ask questions, just replied, "We're on our way." Less than 15 minutes later, the quiet suburban street transformed. 2 military SUVs pulled up fast and hard, doors flying open before the engines even stopped. Uniformed military personnel, including Captain Harris, stepped out with authority. The crowd that had been filming started murmuring louder. Cameras now turned toward the unexpected arrival of the military. The police officers looked stunned, frozen in place as Captain Harris marched toward them. "Release him immediately," he ordered. "This man is a decorated soldier and under my command." One officer tried to explain, but Harris shut him down. "Don't speak. You've made a serious mistake." Reluctantly, the cuffs were removed. Marcus stood slowly, rubbing his wrists, eyes locked on the officers who had disrespected him so publicly. Captain Harris turned to the growing crowd. "What just happened here will not be ignored." The officers, now visibly nervous, realized they were no longer in control. The bystanders had their phones aimed steadily, catching every second. Within minutes, the entire situation had flipped. Marcus, once treated like a criminal, now stood tall, surrounded by his fellow soldiers. The officers, full of pride moments earlier, were now overwhelmed by fear. One phone call had changed everything, and the fallout had only begun. By nightfall, the video of Marcus being handcuffed in uniform had already gone viral. Social media exploded with outrage. Clips were shared by celebrities, activists, and veterans groups, all asking the same thing. How could this happen to a U.S. soldier in uniform? News stations picked up the story, replaying the footage of Marcus calmly explaining his identity, while two officers forcefully detained him. Hashtags like #Justice for Marcus and #Hero Not Threat began trending worldwide. The public demanded accountability. Within 24 hours, the mayor held a press conference, visibly shaken by the backlash. "We are deeply disturbed by the treatment of Sergeant Marcus Brown. An immediate investigation is underway," he said. But it wasn't just words. Real action followed. The police department, under immense pressure, placed both officers on administrative leave. Internal Affairs began reviewing their past conduct, and soon, other complaints about racial profiling started resurfacing. Within a week, both officers were officially terminated from their positions. Legal experts debated whether criminal charges should follow. Meanwhile, Marcus remained composed, appearing on national television to share his side of the story. He didn't speak with anger or hatred. Instead, he calmly described the pain of being disrespected in the very uniform he wore to defend the country. His grace under pressure only amplified public support. Veterans called him a hero. Civilians called him a symbol of dignity. One retired general said, "Sergeant Brown showed more honor in handcuffs than those officers did in uniform." Protests turned into peaceful gatherings demanding reform, and the city promised new training programs focused on racial sensitivity. Marcus hadn't planned to become a public figure, but his story forced a city and a country to look in the mirror. Justice had begun, but for him, it was never about revenge. It was always about respect. In the weeks that followed, Marcus Brown's life changed in ways he never expected. What began as a humiliating experience on a quiet suburban street had turned into a national movement for justice and change. Marcus was invited to speak at schools, universities, and public events. His message was always the same: firm, honest, and peaceful. He didn't seek revenge against the officers who wronged him. He wanted awareness, accountability, and real change. His powerful words reached millions. "If this could happen to me in uniform, imagine what happens to those without." His courage inspired others to speak up about their own experiences. And slowly, police departments across the country began to review their training and community policies. One department even hired Marcus as a consultant to help build better relations between law enforcement and communities of color. The town where the incident occurred installed a new police chief, one who met with Marcus personally and apologized on behalf of the department. That moment, quiet and sincere, meant more to Marcus than any headline ever could. Still, Marcus remained humble. He continued serving in the military, quietly mentoring younger soldiers, and reminding them that strength comes not just from force, but from restraint, integrity, and heart. He never saw himself as a hero, just a man who stood tall when it mattered most. The officers who profiled him had lost their badges, but Marcus gained something far greater: the respect of a nation and the power to spark real conversations about justice. His story didn't end in anger, ended in change. And as he looked out at a crowd of students cheering for him during one of his talks, he smiled quietly, knowing that sometimes the loudest message is delivered not by shouting but by standing with quiet strength and unshakable dignity. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Subscribe to The Silent Side USA for more powerful true stories that need to be heard.